Effective teaching and learning. The teaching and making it more effective so that it becomes learning centric is the objective for my presentation on this topic. With increasing number of engineering institutes, with increasing number of teachers, there is a need to train the teachers for effective teaching. And if we want to do this, one has to follow the basic principles. What are those basic principles? And that is to make the things possible which are impossible. How do we begin? Start by doing what is necessary, then what is possible, and suddenly you will find that you are doing impossible. This is the success story for every activity in our life. We should dare to dream and dream big. Only difference between dreams and accomplishment is the burning desire and a fire in the belly to want to make the dreams a reality. Today, what is the role of engineering teachers? It's engineering as well as teaching. Engineering teaching is a challenge, and there is a changed role of engineering teachers today because of the challenges we face because of globalization as well as the industrialization. And thus, teaching effectiveness is one of the major issues which we have to discuss. The challenges in front of the teaching community are: is it possible to get 100% pass out of the students like in the schools? Is it possible to get good scores as well as grades for the students to achieve the university ranks and to see that the students' attendance in a classroom is 100%? These are the major challenges a teacher faces today, and we have to see how do we work on these challenges. The purpose of teaching involves several components. The first and the foremost component is bodies of knowledge. Knowledge is the key word in teaching. It's not the information which we want to pass on to the students, but it's the knowledge which is passed down to the students. The most important activity in the teaching is to convey professional practices in engineering fields, and also to develop, validate and implement innovative, cost-effective and time-efficient instructional and curricular strategies and technologies for improving student learning and enhancing the instructional effectiveness. Let's look at the best practices in this regard being followed at the premium institutes like IITs. The entire education system is designed as student-centric, learning-centric, interactive learning and knowledge-centric. So, these are the four major aspects in teaching at the premier institutes. In addition to this, we have to clearly define the learning objectives. One must have a cordial relationship between the teacher and the students. This will inspire the students to willingly participate in the class. The teacher is one of the major components in the teaching learning process. A teacher has to set an example in front of the students so that the students respect the teacher, students learn from the teacher and the students interact with the teacher. What it calls for is the preparation. The preparation time which a teacher spends will decide the effectiveness of teaching. In fact, there is no well-defined time period for preparing 1 hour lecture. It could be 2 hours, it could be 10 hours, it could be 12 hours. So, it all depends upon what kind of preparation a teacher does before facing the students. One of the most important attributes of the teacher is the punctuality. One has to be in time for the class so that the students follow the teacher. And then the quality of teaching. We have to address number of students. Assuming a 60 student class, every minute of teacher is equivalent to 60 minutes of two students. And that's where the quality of teaching is very important, so that the 1 hour spent in the classroom by the students is effectively utilized by them. Of course, the class notes and the assignments play a very vital role as the best practices being followed by the teachers. What are class notes? Class notes reflect what teacher does in the class, what he writes, what he speaks, and that reflects in the class notes of the students. Can the class notes be so effective that the students don't have to refer to the textbooks, don't have to refer to the reference books, and the class notes become their lifetime material for that subject? If so, one can imagine what kind of preparation is required by the teacher, what kind of time planning is required by the teacher, so that the class notes which are taken by the students are the effective material for their lifetime. The assignments keep the students along with the class. Whatever assignments are given on a particular course, if the students attempt on the same day, that brings the punctuality, regularity, and the learning for the students. Let's look at one of the examples of well-known professor C.K. Prahlad. C.K. Prahlad, as a teacher, nudged his students to stretch their minds. So that's the most important attributes which a teacher can imbibe in the students. Of course, you must be knowing about Professor C.K. Prahlad, who expired last year, and he was a business philosopher, a professor of strategy at the University of Michigan's Stephen M. Ross School of Business, and a well-known consultant. Among Prahlad's last works was a column in the April Harvard Business Review. It states, "Executives are constrained not by resources but by their imagination." It's true for all activities, including the teaching. Can we stretch our imagination so that we can be more effective in teaching and the students are more effective in learning? Continuing the best practices, if you go back and see the practices followed in the primary schools, what kind of teaching and learning process is followed in the primary schools? And that is the one which inspires us. How do we follow similar practice for higher learning and particularly for technical education? One has to have a teaching plan. Teaching plan clearly divides the entire syllabus in the number of lectures to be covered for that particular subject, and clearly tells the students what is being covered in every lecture. We have to have combination of lectures and tutorials. Engineering is an analytical learning. It's not theory, but it's the application of theory, and that's what is best learned through the tutorials. So we must have the best combination of lectures and tutorials, and this also is supplemented by excellent set of assignments, and this becomes a continuous assessment for the student, so that it's a process of learning, process of making mistakes, learning from the mistakes, and improving one's knowledge. Most of the cases, there is weightage for in-semester evaluation. That means a student who is very particular during the semester, he is well qualified for the final examination, and thus there is nothing like a fear of examination, which normally becomes a bottleneck for some of the students. While teaching, as a teacher, we must stress on basics and fundamentals. This is the one which is going to take the students to greater heights. These are the things which are asked during placement interviews. These are the things on which rest of the technology is built, and one can also innovate in the existing technology based on basics and fundamentals. One has to also see that the students develop analytical abilities, and for this purpose one has to stress on the assignments, and also how do we develop the thinking process. The thinking process is very important if we want to innovate, if we want to come up with something new, and also we want to invent certain new technologies. And finally, what we have to do in our career is application of knowledge, what we gather during the student age. And thus, acquiring the basic knowledge, acquiring the analytical abilities, acquiring the thinking process, and finally, application of knowledge is the key process which a student goes through. One of the ways to understand the basics, to understand the fundamentals and application of fundamentals is the tutorials. Well designed tutorials will lead to the success. And finally, one can make use of effective use of teaching assistants. Because of unavailability of large number of qualified teachers, for the tutorials it becomes mandatory for us to make use of teaching assistants. These are the assistants who can help smaller group of students to take care of the problems as well as solve the problems with the help of teaching assistants. There are also outside classroom interactions. In addition to within the classroom, outside interactions will lead to several new features of learning. Outside classroom interactions will not only enhance what is taught in the classroom, but something beyond. Finally, effective implementation of students' feedback is vital if we want to improve the teaching learning process. Most of the institutions carry out the process of students' feedback. Is it effectively utilized for improvement of the teaching learning process, or is it a formality which is completed for the sake of it? If it is properly utilized, we get several feedbacks from the students which help us to improve our methodology, improve our presentation techniques, and also improve the way of teaching as well as learning. One of the things which is also important these days is accountability. Are we accountable for what we deliver, what we teach to the students? Are we accountable for the results of the students? Can we be very happy if the students' results are good and say that I have done it, and when the results are bad, blame the students and say that students are not up to the mark? So, that is where the accountability plays a very vital role in the teacher's life. One must take the blame for the student's failure. I would say that success of the students is the success of the students. Failure of the students is failure of the teacher, and thus the accountability of the teacher remains in terms of why the students fail in the class, why do they not succeed, what efforts are made by the teachers to see that every student is up to the mark, he gains the knowledge, applies the knowledge, and successfully completes his examination. Outcomes. This is something which is neglected in the entire teaching learning process. Have we ever thought that why a particular course is taught, what outcomes are expected from the course, what outcomes are expected at the end of completion of a degree, and this is something which is very important in terms of teaching learning process. If the outcomes are up to the mark as expected, we can say that the teaching learning is effective. If the outcomes are not up to the mark, the teaching learning process is not effective. Don't judge teaching learning process merely by the percentage pass of the students. That is only one indicator. There are several indicators which will talk about the outcomes. When it comes to the placement, that is where the abilities of the students are reflected. When it comes to the career of the students after taking the placement, once again the teaching learning process comes to their rescue in going to higher heights. Many places today there is a lack of senior teachers, and that is where the senior teachers, whatever number they are in a particular institute, have a vital role to play. The senior teachers in fact should take up the junior most classes, so that the fundamentals are strong, basics are strong, on which the other teachers can build up. Training of the junior faculty and the teaching assistants is also one more role to be played by the senior teachers. It is very important that the junior teachers draw the experience of the senior teachers and make their lectures more effective. The concept of large classrooms is coming in. Instead of having a classroom of 60, one can have a classroom of 120, 240, 360 and so on. Why is it so? Why do we go for large classrooms? It is essentially to draw on the advantage of senior teachers. Senior teachers teaching makes lot of difference, and that is where instead of addressing only a class of 60, if they can address large number of students with technologically well equipped classroom, this is going to be the way how the teaching learning process will take place in future. And of course, this has very many challenges. It requires advanced planning and careful organization of the lecture. As far as the teaching aids are concerned, most of the classrooms are well equipped with various teaching aids like LCD projections, internet, teaching learning experiments and projects. Now, when we are having the teaching learning process, one of the things which we often face is one-way traffic. It is only one-way process, that is teacher talks and the students listen. But the teaching becomes much more effective and interesting if it is transformed into interactive learning. The students are encouraged to ask questions, and when we have an activity of 1 hour lecture, it is well known that attention spans of students are limited and split up class time accordingly. The attention time is much less than 1 hour, and that is where for a class period one could divide into 20-minute slots, and this is followed by an activity and then additional slot is taken up. What is this? After every 20 minutes, we have to think of some sort of a interaction between the students and the teachers, and thus the teachers can even have the small groups of learning in the large classroom to enhance critical thinking, promote cognitive elaboration, provide feedback and help students to appreciate diversity. Interactive learning is something which is essential, particularly in professional studies like engineering. There should be active participation by the students during the class. and this is very, very vital. And this active participation can be called by the teacher in terms of engagement triggers after about 20 minutes. And these are well selected interactive questions. It could be yes or no type, it could be multiple choice questions, it could be taking the student's poll for a particular question, it could be fill in the gap. It hardly takes a minute, but that 1 minute triggering helps the students to be attentive towards the lecture and take part in the lecture. One of the things which is very vital for the students' community to learn during the teaching learning process is to be inquisitive. Inquisitiveness is something which will lead for them to come up with several new features, new technologies, innovations in their career. And most of the cases, it is seen that inquisitiveness is not encouraged. The students should be allowed to ask questions, and they should be able to ask questions, give them the freedom to think, ask questions and propose new ideas. Important questions in life include how, why, what and why not. These questions are not only applicable for teaching learning process, but in general in the life. Take the example of invention of Polaroid instant camera. The Polaroid Model 95, the world's first viable instant picture camera, known as a land camera after its inventor Edwin H. Land, was invented due to curiosity. In fact, this camera was invented by Edwin H. Land to appease his young daughter, who was upset that she could not see a photograph immediately after it was taken. A child asking a question, a child being inquisitive, leads to such important inventions. While we are attentive for the teaching learning process, one of the things is the assessment. We have to remember that every part of education system is a learning process, and thus assessment is also a learning process. The question paper must be a graded question paper. It should not be simple question paper so that every student can get 90 to 100 marks. It should not be too difficult question paper so that every student fails. So we have to have a graded question paper. What does it mean? An excellent student should be able to attempt all the questions successfully. An average student should be able to get about 60% of the question paper solved, and a below average student should be able to get something like 30–40% of the question paper. And this is how the grading is possible. And this needs enormous efforts on the part of teacher while setting the question paper. Question paper is not a compilation of the questions drawn from earlier question papers, but we have to set the question paper in such a way that a student is rewarded for the efforts put in by him. If we don't do this, then students will lose their interest in hard work. The questions should also develop thinking. Even after examination is over, the student should start thinking about the questions and say, why did I not solve this question? Where did I go wrong? What could have been done? So this thinking process is something which leads to learning. We don't want a memory test, because engineers are flooded with handbooks, data books, and the entire websites available for them. So it is not the memory test, but it is the application of knowledge when we set a question paper. Most of the cases, open book examination is also preferred, so that this gives a real life experience of professional education. One of the things which must be done by the teacher is to discuss the answers to the questions in the classroom, so that this enhances learning. This also takes care of the questions, doubts of the students. One of the key features in a professional education is the laboratory, and that is where the students can get hands-on experience. To get hands-on experience, the laboratory has to be well designed. Learning goal of the experiment has to be told to the students, why they are performing a particular experiment, what is the expected outcome of that experiment, and what way it is going to enhance the knowledge in a particular field. And finally, if we have well set of experiments, that may also lead to the creativity of the students, and they may come up with some ideas which we can implement in the laboratory setups to enhance the teaching learning process. Motivation is a key factor in the education. We have to motivate the students, understand the learning process, and if we can motivate the students to learn better, preparing a course outline and writing instructional objectives will be definitely something which we should go for. Let's look at certain well-known sayings about the teachers. I like a teacher who gives you something to take home to think about besides homework. Most of the teachers give homework, but do we also motivate the students to think? A teacher who is attempting to teach without inspiring the pupil with a desire to learn is hammering on cold iron. So, one of the qualities and attributes of teacher is inspiring the students. Education does not mean teaching people to know what they do not know. It means teaching them to behave as they do not but should behave. Swami Vivekananda says, end of education is character. This is the very important definition of a great teacher. The mediocre teacher tells. The good teacher explains. The superior teacher demonstrates. The great teacher inspires. So finally, inspiration is the buzzword for a great teacher. Is it possible to achieve this without spending 16 hours a day with 4 hours of theory and only 4 hours for sleep? You may think I am talking something impossible, something which an ordinary person cannot do. But is it so? In fact, these things are to be practiced, practicing towards perfection every day, competing against oneself every day, and day after day is the only way one can succeed in making the inspiration to the students. And finally, we can conclude from this, when you want success as badly as air, then you will get it. There is no other secret of success. This is what Socrates has said. If you take the praise, then jolly well take the blame. Most of you may be welcoming the students coming and praising you, you are teaching, but have you seen a student coming to you and telling you that where you have gone wrong, how they missed most of the fundamentals? And if someone comes and tells you on the face of you, do you take it properly? And that's what. If you take the praise, then jolly well take the blame. The students may not be bold enough to come and tell you, but they can convey this to the feedback system. So analyze the feedback system very carefully and take the right remarks and improve upon it. And thus, we can see, if we follow this practice, we can unwrap each day like a gift, and every day we have the scope for improvement. Let me tell you that nothing can stop achieving dreams if we pursue with steely determination and sheer willpower. We say that nothing is impossible, everything is possible. You didn't just teach, You became an inspiration, a legend and a hero to the hearts of many students. This sort of comment by the students coming to the teacher is the biggest reward one can imagine in the teacher's life. I am sure most of us want such compliment, and if we want such a compliment, we have to be prepared for 16 hours of work and also 4 hours of theory to practice. I am sure if we follow some of these basic principles, we can improve the teaching learning process more effectively for the benefit of students, for the new generation and for the future of the country. Thank you.